Shalom Bethel family. It is Thursday once again to recap our Torah discussion here at Congregation Bethel in Norfolk this past Saturday. This past Saturday in synagogue we read Parshat Korach, a fairly intense section of the Torah about a rebellion led by Korach and his cohorts. And, it was the day before Father's Day. And so when I was preparing, I was going to give a really nice drush about fatherhood or parenthood and patience based on the Torah portion here. I'm going to share with you that passage, but because of the events that week, the nature of my remarks changed distinctly, particularly as pictures and images came to light of children being separated from their parents, placed in chain link pens, and just horrible things. And so the passage that I was teaching on is based in the very beginning of the Torah portion, where it says that they assembled against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You take too much upon yourselves, for the entire congregation are all holy, and the Lord is in their midst. So why do you raise yourselves above the Lord's assembly?" And Moses heard and fell on his face. And the commentators ask, why did he hear and fall on his face? These people have been complaining about their situation in the desert since they stepped across the Red Sea, even before, when they thought they were trapped. And he doesn't have any answer, any retort. And so Rashi comments on this, and he fell on his face. He says, because of the rebellion, for this was already their fourth offense, right? It's not the first time that they've complained. As I said, they've done it many, many times, right? When they sinned with the calf, Moses pleaded on their behalf. By the episode of the complainers, when they were in the desert and they wanted meat, right? Moses prayed. With the spies in the previous parsha, Shlach Lecha, Moses said to God, "But the Egyptians will hear you. So, don't do this. Don't smite your people, because the Egyptians will hear and they'll think you're weak." But now Korach's rebellion, he became disheartened. Right? Literally, his hands were weakened. This is comparable, Rashi's going to explain it with an analogy, comparable to a prince who sinned against his father, and his father's friend placated the king on his behalf. Once, twice, 3 times. When he offended them a 4th time, the friend became disheartened and said, "How much more can I trouble the king? Perhaps he will no longer accept my petition." Right, so it's a beautiful drash, and the idea is that, Moses might have thought that God would not accept the petition. But of course, God's is always willing to accept petition, that tshuva is always possible, that God is like to us a parent, and the love is unconditional, right? And in God's eyes, we are like princes. A beautiful, beautiful drash about patience and parenthood. However, there are some things, particularly when it comes to parenthood, for which we should not have patience. And what's been going on in the southern border of the United States is one of them, right? We've been talking about, as I've heard in the media, and as of today, actually, the president signed a proclamation that would end this policy of separating kids from their parents at the border, but we've already got thousands of kids who are in this situation, who will never be the same because of it. And it's also not really clear. There's a lot of caveats in that proclamation, just how quickly anything's going to be changing. So at the very, very end in the Babylonian Talmud of Psachim, there is a passage, and I wanted to mention it in light of this whole situation, because everyone is talking about how cruel it is to the children to separate them from their parents. But I don't hear enough people talking about how cruel it is to the parents to separate them from their children. Because all a parent wants to do is protect their child. That is what parenthood is all about. As a matter of fact, I brought this passage from the end of Tractate Psachim in the Talmud, where the Gemara discusses the case concerning a pidyon haben, Rabbi Simlai, who is most famous for being the first to declare and organize 613 mitzvot in the Torah, the Taryag mitzvot. So he goes to attend a Pidyon Haben, the redemption of a firstborn child, which is supposed to happen with a Kohen on the 30th day. On the 30th day, you would come and you would redeem the child by handing over 5 silver shekels. Right? We still do this to this day. When my son Elijah was born, we redeemed him with one of the Kohanim in the congregation. So the celebrants come to Rabbi Simlai, and they say, we have a problem. Right? There's 2 blessings that get said at a Pidyon Haben. The first one, it's obvious that the father says, right? It's blessed are you, Lord our God, sovereign of the universe, who sanctified us through the mitzvot and commanded us to redeem our firstborn son. So obviously it's the obligation of the father to redeem his firstborn son, and therefore it makes sense that the father should say the blessing. However, they raise the question, who should say the second blessing, which is the Shehechianu, which you might be familiar with. We say it on holidays. It's the blessing we say to thank God for bringing us to a sacred moment, an important moment in our lives. So who should say this Shehechianu blessing, being thankful for the moment? Right? What's the dilemma? You could say that the priest should recite the blessing, right? Because the priest is getting 5 silver shekels, some financial benefit, whereas you might say it's not appropriate for the father to say it because he's losing. He's going to have a financial loss through all this. On the other hand, it's an important milestone in the life of the family and the father and certainly the son. And therefore, you might say that the father should say the Shehechianu. And Rabbi Simlai doesn't know the answer. And we don't know what they did at that Pidyon Haben. It remains a mystery. But when he got home, when he got back to his yeshiva, he put it before the elders of the yeshiva. He said, who should do it? And they say without hesitation, the father should recite the Shehechianu. Why? Because the scholars said to him that the father has a special role with regard to the son. The Kohen, it's another day, another 5 shekels. But for the father, the right to protect and redeem a son, that is the seminal role of a parent. And therefore, the halakha, Jewish law, is that the father recites both the blessings. Right? That, according to this Gemara, is that this passage of the Talmud is the quintessential role of a parent, to protect their child. And I was feeling, it's funny, a few weeks ago, I was in Israel, and I was at Yad Vashem. And I was having a terrible time. It's always painful going to Yad Vashem. That's the Holocaust Memorial and Museum in Israel. But this time I was having a particularly hard time. What was getting me was all the images of parents, particularly because of me, fathers, holding the hands of their children as they were marching off to death. Because ultimately, all the parent could do in that situation, the only thing that they could do to protect their child was to hold their hand and be brave and help them feel like everything was going to be all right, even as their world was turning completely upside down. And I looked at those images where all that could be done was for the parent to be there and to feel that sense of protection for their kid. And even as the world ended, at least for those families and in many ways for all of us, they would protect them. They would protect them. And just that will to protect them made me cry. It was horrible. And I thought of Janusz Korach, right? The head of the orphanage who marched off with his kids to the gas chambers to be killed. They weren't his kids. He wasn't a Jewish person, but he was in charge of them because that's what parenthood means. It means you don't leave your child. To have your child forcibly taken from you is wrong. Not only is it wrong, it's worse than that, right? Because what's really happening, I think, is that an ideology of white supremacy, or maybe it's national supremacy, And racism is really being enforced here. And I will make that argument as well from the Torah. So it is clear that you may not separate children from parents from the Torah. That's called kidnapping, and it's against Jewish law and any law. However, it is not true universally in the Torah that you cannot separate young from parents. And so animals young can be separated from their parents. And it's a famous example of Shiloach HaKain, that you would shoo away a mother bird before you collect her eggs. Right? So you can collect her eggs because she's an animal, but even that you can't be done cruelly. You can't do it in front of her. And similarly, there's for the children, there's the rule that we use to say you can't eat milk and meat together, but that you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Again, you can take the kid because it's an animal, and you can eat it, right? This baby goat, the kid in this case is a baby goat, right? So you can take the young and eat it, but you can't do it cruelly. You can't prepare the baby in front of or literally in the mother's milk, right? Because that's cruel. So minimally, when we look at what's going on in the southern border, it's cruel, right? If you wouldn't take the young of an animal in front of them because it's too cruel, how can you rip a child from their mother? Or tell them, going back to Janusz Korach, that that it is that their kids are being taken away for a bath and then just not bring them back, right? There's a cruelty here, right? If we wouldn't do it to animals, how much more so for human beings? Unless you're not thinking of these people as human beings, right? Because the only way you can justify this practice, the only way you can say that this is normal, is if, like with animals, you say separating them from their young is okay. Right? Ultimately, whoever approves of this policy is treating those who are fleeing north, or even if they're trying to illegally get into this country, they are treating them as less than human. That is what we call supremacy, usually white supremacy. In this case, I don't know if it's national supremacy, but we're saying being on this side of the border where we would not separate kids from their parents makes you more human somehow, more deserving of the laws that govern humanity than if you're on that side of the border. That is racism. That is supremacism. And quite frankly, that has no place in Torah. Right? We do not treat people like animals. It is not okay to take their young. All the more so, the cruelty is not okay. And a country that calls itself a symbol of freedom throughout the world, a country that has been a place of refuge and solace for the Jewish people and so many others, has no business being involved in that kind of activity. It is against the Torah. It is against good human righteousness, and it needs to stop. And I hope that the proclamation the president signed helps that to happen, but I encourage you to keep up your phone calls to your congressmen, to your senators, to the White House. Say that this does not go away until every single one of these children is reunited with his or her parents. That's not only the ones, right, even their parents who've already been deported, because this apparently was happening, people being sent out of the country without their children, that it is incumbent morally not only to make this right by reuniting the parents with their children, but also by trying to do whatever we can that we now owe these families to help mitigate the trauma that these kids and these families will feel for their entire lives. That is now our responsibility. And from now on, we need to remember. God help us remember that human beings are human beings, no matter the color of their skin, no matter where they were born, where they live, or what country they are trying to enter. I hope that next week we'll have better things to talk about. In the meantime, I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.